This is not a test. Stay calm in an orderly fashion. Make your way to the lifeboats.
Mayday, the ship is sinking.
So welcome back, everybody. We're so excited to have you on the Friday podcast where we are doing interviews. So today we got a really cool interview. We're going to be talking to Mr. Tory Worth. He is kind of, he's a juggernaut, as we like to say, inside of the recovery community. He is north of me in the Michigan region, but Mr. Worth has a pretty extensive career. He's been working 23 years inside of the recovery organizations, inside of recovery community, and just recovery in general. He is a man of many talents. He is not only a CCAR certified trainer, he's also a recovery coach, as so are we all, but he is also a certified alcohol and drug counselor, has his bachelor's and master's degree in social work. He is just a tour de force of the recovery community, so we're so excited to have him on today. With that being said, Mr. Worth, how are you, sir?
Hey, Christian, I am doing just amazing, actually. It's great to be on, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here. I had Christian on our virtual Inspired Recovery series a few months ago and got a chance to meet you, and felt like there was a connection right from the get-go. So it's always good to see you, man. Glad to be on here.
I'm saying, and I couldn't agree more. I think it tends to happen, and I don't know for you, but we're both recovery coaches. We're both in recovery ourselves, but there's something about recovery coach trainers where it's like you're kind of on the other side of the wall and you're seeing the inner workings behind the curtain, and you're like, you just get that vibe from people that are in the training, but you get people that are trainers and you talk to them, and it's like you're talking the same language. You have the same passions. You're really about this, in it for the recovery. So I was so excited to meet you and hear from you a couple of months ago.
Yeah, you bet. Yeah, we speak the same language. You know, we kind of have that language that we just kind of comes from the heart, and we just get a chance to, I love these connections. I think if there's any positive side of what we're going through is that we've gotten a chance to meet some people that otherwise we might not normally meet. So this is one of them. So I appreciate you providing this opportunity, man. I'm looking forward to it.
I am looking forward to it. So with that being said, let's go ahead and just jump right into it. So Mr. Worth, Tory, could you tell the listeners here kind of your extensive personal experience with recovery?
I would love to. I love talking about recovery, and it helps to remind me kind of where I've come from, you know, because it really, if you'd have told me that I would be where I am today, I never in a million years would have guessed. You know, just putting that one day together when I first started out, you know, you didn't see where the thread was going to lead, you know, and so many people said, you know, don't quit before the miracle happens, and what was it? There's the you know, sometimes you don't know where the miracle is going to be. But when I got sober, I got sober at 17. I had been to 2 treatment centers previous to that. And so there was a lot of pressure from my family and the court system to get my stuff together. And so I realized, you know, external pressure was one thing, but it really wasn't until that internal pressure really kicked in. And when I used, there was so much shame, there was so much guilt that I felt, and I couldn't live under my own skin. I remember one of the lowest points, seeing a reflection in one of the deli counters that I used to work at. I would avoid it at all costs. You know, that was where I was at the bottom of I didn't like being me. And so when I had opportunities to go to treatment, I planted the seed for recovery. And one of the treatment centers stuck out to me, which was, I was 16 years old. I was there for 43 days, and we went sledding, we went bowling. And I remember having fun as a kid again, you know, without having drugs or alcohol, without having anybody expect anything of me or doing anything. You know, it's just, we were all kids having fun again without using alcohol and drugs. And it was, it's, you know, in my mind, it was like, this was what things were supposed to look like. But the daunting thing for me and for all the young people that went out is that we were going right back into those same communities that we came from. And that was where the hard work, you know, was going to happen. And to be honest with you, I was intending to stay sober. I thought, yeah, I can do this. I'll go to meetings, and went to that meeting that first night. And the next day, gravity pulled, man. And I went back to it for about a year. And and I, did a lot of stuff when, they said that, you possibly go to jail, all those yets happened really fast at a young age for me. And it got to the point to where I really, struggled, and I ended up getting sent to another treatment center for only 10 days, but it was not a treatment center I would ever recommend anybody to go to. And it was actually in Grand Rapids, and it's no longer, both treatment centers that I went to are no longer. I'm not sure if that's related to me or what, but
as I say, you never know.
Never know. So I went to that treatment center for 10 days, and it was terrible. And but I knew one thing: I did not want to have to go back. I hated being told what to do. And but that really set something inside me that I'm like, I see where this road is going, and it's not. It was jail, prison, not having control of my own life, and I didn't want that to be the way that my life was. And I had lost my father when I was 12 years old. There was a 19-year-old who was drinking and driving. My dad was going from Buffalo, where we lived, to Saginaw to a funeral for his grandma. And so there was a 19-year-old who jumped the median while he was intoxicated. My dad died. And so part of my coping skills was that, was trying to, use to kind of numb the feelings and how I felt of that situation. So that's where my substance use came from, which was just trying to deal with some of that stuff that, like, how do you handle that, and there was no real good way for me to do that. And so that's where substance use came into play for me. And so 2 treatment centers after that, man, I kind of wanted to get my stuff together. And so I, started going to, there's a club, animal club that's close to where I live. And I used to take public transportation to this animal club every day. I would go do community service. I would scrub the walls at the animal club where we used to smoke. And let me tell you, man, those walls were thick. It was back in the day where half the table, was the smoking section, the other half wasn't, and so, I would just hang out there. And there was this guy who was like Ed Heisey. He was the animal club. He just managed the animal club, and he sat there all day. And so I had a place to go. I go in there and talk with him. We would, tell jokes, and I had a place. I had a place where I could hang out. And because, I was 17, man. I didn't have, it was like I couldn't. I realized soon I could hang out with my friends. And so what else do you do, man? So I started hanging out there with the animal club, and then really quickly I kind of became adopted by a lot of folks in the recovery community. It was really, there used to be a Friday night campfire meeting that I would go to every Friday night, and families were there, and nothing like having a recovery group under the stars, just talking and really being a family. And it really saved my life. I mean, it was such an important thing, because at 17, 18, you want to feel a connectedness to other people, and that was one thing that was just missing. Even with my friends, like they weren't the best friends, but at least I felt like I was part of something, and so I had to really exchange that for those friends. And I found amazing people, and that really brought recovery to life for me. Were those people that were staying sober and showing me that it was possible. And I remember the first person that looked me in the eyes and said, it's nice to see that you're looking at people, you're looking at people in their face and not at your shoes. I used to, have my head down, and I just didn't say much. I was quiet, and so I kind of had to build some self-esteem back up. And I remember that first person telling me that, it's nice to see your eyes and that you're looking straight ahead now, not at your shoes. I'm like, I didn't even realize anybody cared or noticed, what I did. And so I learned pretty quickly on that there were folks that noticed and cared. So, yeah. And that, I tell you what, those early days of recovery, it was amazing. There were no young people meetings there at that time up here. And so I talked to a person that I looked up to and said, how do I get some young people around here? And he said, well, start some young people's meetings. And so we started a couple of them. And next thing you know, we were driving to so I live in Petoskey, Michigan. So we would drive down to like Lansing and Detroit and Flint for the Mickey Paws every year. And didn't realize how many young people were sober in the state of Michigan, just because we live in a little rural area up here. So, but when we went to the Mickey Paw and saw, hundreds of young people around the state staying sober, it was incredible. kind of gave us some passion and realizing that we're not alone. And then plus I was taking these carloads of young people from around our area down there to show them like, hey, this is what's going on. So we felt, pretty connected to each other. So it was pretty neat to be able to start to see how we could bring other young people together. And unfortunately, with young people meetings that I've seen, they ebb and flow around here. Some group gets them going and then it kind of teeters off. So it's interesting, but
well, and I would say that's definitely unique. Is as you were telling me about that, the thing that definitely it stood out for me is the fact that you were kind of the rare subset of like, you found your recovery super early on, and most people aren't privileged or have that level of opportunity where they find their recovery early on and then it becomes an integrated, instilled part of your being. I'm wondering, not to get sidetracked at all, because you got, I'm sure, a heck of a lot more to tell you about your recovery story, but could you at least speak to a bit of the important, like, what did you find when you were young in recovery? What did you find was your biggest support? What did you find is like, this is what's going to keep me going and keep me, steady, because you had a lot of, I'm sure, external influences that were trying to get you off the beaten path.
Yeah, oh, that's a great question. I don't think I have a couple of things. So my family, I have a really strong, my mom, I mean, she was a young mom, like she was 19 when she had me. And so she had a lot of maturing to do, but her unconditional love and my family, I have my grandma and I have two uncles, and they were just pillars for me. They really were, pretty non-judgmental, always there. I remember one Christmas when I was in treatment, it was like a blizzard and they drove, nobody else's parents showed up. My mom and my family showed up, they're the crazy ones driving through the winter to kind of be with me. So I've got to say, having that there, was huge. We don't have a big family, but the family that I have, it was, just amazing. And then I would say, that recovery community was really magical at that time, and it still is. I know there's so many things, but when I think back to my early recovery and just seeing those little pieces that were there when I was getting sober, it was so kind of, it's spiritual in nature for me when I look back. I've been able to make so many good friends, and people were there when they needed to be. I was taken to some retreats when I was young. Some guys took me to my first Lions game sober, and I just think back to some of those folks that were just there. There's one guy who he used to train German Shepherds, and he spoke German, and he would do the tracking. They were tracking German Shepherds, and I'd go to his house and he'd say, "All right, go hike for a mile." He lived in the woods, and he said, "Go hike for a mile now. We'll come find you." So I remember, walking. So just doing stuff. I needed to do stuff. I was one of those kids that just wanted to have fun, and actually, I kind of put together my bucket list at 18. I'm like, well, what are all the things that I want to do? And so I skydiving. I want to go bungee jumping. I want to travel. And within a year, those were done. Did it a couple of times. So it was kind of, I got to really know how you can really make things happen. We used to call ourselves more of the armchair philosophers, where you think back of what are all the things I'm going to do and don't do them. Recovery taught me that, what, you can set your mind to it, you can do it, and you can make your dreams come true. You can make your goals come true. And that was kind of early on, was one of those moments of like, we can do this, and then things happened. It's really crazy how all of a sudden opportunities, one of my first jobs was working at I did some painting, and then I did some landscaping. And then once the first opportunity came to where it was working with kids in the criminal justice system, they would get transferred from like non-secure detention centers, and they would want somebody to come and sit with them or transport them. And so I took this training and then took that position. I would sit with kids that were like locked out. It was really crazy. Like, you would have to holdovers for adolescents, and I would go and sit with the kids and just talk with them while they were being in the holdover. It was just an opportunity for me just to connect with them and just try to be there with them. And that really ignited the passion. And so there was a local teen center in Charlevoix where they were putting together this, it was called Discovery Recovery Group. And it was so basically teenagers coaching other teenagers, but that term wasn't around back in the 90s yet. Well, at least not for us. And so, but that's pretty much what it was. I had 5 of our peers. We were all probably 19 to early 20s, and we would go into this teen center, and they would have kids there that were taking some substance use groups. And then we would go and sit with them, and then we'd go break out into small groups. And I would take 4 or 5 kids, and some of my other peers would take 4 or 5 kids, and we would just go and talk with them, share our experience. What did that subject material mean to you guys? And so it kind of gave us that chance of like what it felt like to be a counselor, or what it felt like to really be a coach, of coaching adolescents. And so I learned a lot in that role, and I realized this is what I want to do. And one of my peers said, "Tory's going to do this for a living. We can tell," and
well, it's interesting foreshadowing, isn't it?
It really was, and that actually, so I wanted to work in the field. I wanted to be around this because I love seeing that aha moment. I love seeing when people can have that aha moment of like, they get it, or sometimes just those little words of encouragement can mean so much to somebody. And how much it helped me feel like I had a purpose. When I look back to my using, man, I was like just lost. I was so lost, didn't know where to go, didn't know what to do. And all of a sudden, to have some purpose back in your life just is priceless.
Well, and I think I at least in my experiences working with the recoveries that I work with, because I do, we work with both men and women, and we try to have recovery, women work with women, men work with men, but I see more than ever inside of young recoveries, especially guys that are, less than 30 years old, that there is usually only one main reason why they continue to relapse and relapse. Well, 2 is the unpacked emotion. So there's a traumatic event, they didn't unpack it appropriately, and it's continuing to cycle back up. But more oftentimes than not, it's they lack direction, unfulfilled potential. They are a byproduct of the society that has essentially cast them aside and castigated them to like, you're not worth anything, you didn't graduate high school, whatever it might be. And just by showing them those little words of encouragement, or furthermore, like just setting out a plan and be like, let's get some goals going, let's move in a direction. It's as if, I like what you said, like that light turns on in their head. They get it. The revelation of recovery happens. It just waves over them. And then this person that, a year ago was using, and everybody is kind of looking at them and be like, well, they'll never amount to anything, is now somebody that's a leading voice in their respective community and is really working towards a goal. So I think, it's really interesting that at such a young age, you were participating in that before you ever really knew where that could go for you.
Yeah, and it's funny because when I talk about, even when I see myself talking about it back then, I was still full of fear. There was so much insecurity within me at that time that I still was kind of like, can I even do this? Am I even, should I even be here? And I can remember all those little, insecurities that I still had back in the day. And you still didn't exactly know where this all was going, so it's just kind of funny to talk about it now, and to being those 30-year-olds, and I've been in still been periods in my recovery where you kind of like, well, what is the next step, or what am I going to do, and what's going to happen? And so life is interesting, especially when you talk back on it. You can make it seem like you had it all together the whole time, which I certainly didn't. But what a journey.
Absolutely. So I want to switch up a little bit, and I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit to our listeners, our viewers, about your agency. What are you doing now? I know you're a man, once again, of many talents. You serve on many boards. So what do you do?
So it's a great question and a great segue. So so I was volunteering when I was doing that with the adolescents. We would go in there and talk with the adolescents. Well, I went away for about a year. I worked at a treatment center for a year, working with adults at 20 years old. I was working at a treatment center where I wasn't even legal to drink yet, which is kind of funny. But I learned a lot from the clients. I probably didn't help a whole heck of a lot, but at least I learned quite a bit. And what I learned was, in this field, sometimes you just say, all right, go figure it out. Here's a didactic, and here, go do this with a group. And so I learned, I learned the hard way, in a sense. And so what was really cool is that volunteer job that I had for working with adolescents, actually, I was offered a position. They were starting this adolescents recovery high program. It was one of the first in the state. And said yes. Even though I had just worked this job for like a year, working at treatment center, I'm like just getting my feet wet. And I ended up moving from Traverse City back to Petoskey. And I worked at that job with adolescents for 18 years. That program actually stopped, I think it was in 2016, maybe. After that program ended, we had kids from all over the state coming to the Recovery High program. And so it was kind of like, well, what's the next step for me? And I was thinking of doing something different. And that's where I applied for this job called the NMSAS Peer Recovery Support Services Coordinator, which is a mouthful, but most of our acronyms are in this field. So, and that really I didn't know much about it. I wasn't really in the know of recovery coach, and I kind of heard a little bit about what they were, but I just didn't have the education on most of them. I was pretty active in my own recovery community, and it just wasn't something that we were too aware of. And but it sounded really intriguing, and I can't tell you how glad I am that I was able to hop. It was really tough to change, especially working in a place for 18 years to change. I mean, we'll talk about change. It's not easy for many of us, and it's kind of like that leap of faith, and you're like, I don't know what exactly I'm getting into. And when I learned, once I kind of got the job and learned all the things I was getting into, I was pretty nervous about, can I do this? I've never done a lot of public speaking. I've done a lot of open talks. I've talked about my story, but as far as other substantial, information and resources and things like that, I just didn't do that very many presentations and trainings and networking. And a lot of times for our agency that I used to work for, people came to us. We would be a place that was a pillar in the community, and people would come to us. So this job was, we go to them. We do a lot of outreach, and we do a lot of door to door, and we do a lot of connecting. So that was kind of a whole nother realm for me, which I needed all of that. It really kind of helped rounded me as a person to get outside of my comfort zone and get a chance to learn. I mean, talk about just learning so much, like you've seen with the recovery coach trainings, a lot of times as a trainer, we get a chance to learn so much from each person that comes into the trainings. And it's wow. So part of my job today as the coordinator is that we get a chance to provide Recovery Coach Academy trainings. We built a network. So actually, I think this is our 9th year doing trainings at NMSAS, and they really, they found the need by bringing together this recovery council, kind of like a think tank of like, what is it that we need in our region? And they realized how many people that go to treatment and, who are looking for some support, a lot of times, there's a lot of gaps, obviously. When people are leaving treatment, they're going back. It's just like I was going back from, treatment to all of a sudden back into a community that can be really difficult to stay sober in. And so we need to make sure that we connect people to some support. So they started training people as recovery coaches. So that way we can kind of have capacity building of people now are going to be in their communities, and they can provide some recovery coach services, and we can connect them to some support. And the bigger the network we have, the more people that we can connect to support, which I really like that model of just, and taking the training. When I went through the CCAR training, I'm like, where has this been for my 20 years of recovery? Like, how have I missed this? And sometimes I think we're easy to label things where you hear recovery coach. And I think that was what I was guilty of. I've heard recovery coach think, oh, they're just trying to make money off of something. And that's it's such an important aspect to it, but that's not what this is about. This is really of trying to connect those gaps and having people in place that can really motivate and encourage people in the recovery, and can do it with the art and skill of as a recovery coach. And I really saw the value once I went through the training, went through all the modules, and like, yeah, this all makes sense. This is some of the stuff that we've been doing before, but just didn't really have a name for it. And
and I think you just hit the nail on the head. And speaking to Phil Valentine, one thing that really bubbled up was Phil Valentine, executive director of CCAR, for those listening. But a concerted, scientifically based effort to approach recovery with individuals who have experienced addiction themselves. It seems like an obvious or self-evident truth, and it wasn't until really CCAR and programs like it at the grassroots level started doing that we started seeing this massive, like, whoa, what is happening? And this is a completely different way. So yeah, I think I couldn't agree with you more as somebody that went through the training. I mean, it just was hitting me in waves of like, what is going on? Why is this not more public? Why do we not speak more loudly about this? And as I got plugged into the recovery community more, I understood, it is spoken publicly. It's just growing slowly over time.
Right. So true. Yeah. And when I got this position, so my predecessor was Tom McHale, and he was on he was the founding board member on Faces and Voices of Recovery. And so I was looking, he would take me. So right there, you're kind of like, oh, good. How am I going to, here's this kid who got sober at a young age, but he's been working with adolescents his whole life. And now going into this, I just felt very insecure again. I felt like, oh my gosh, I don't think I can do this. And he would take me to like, what would it be, like there's the conference that they have. It's not NADAC, but it's the Michigan one, the MADAC, MADAC conference. And Tom was a keynote speaker, and so he would bring me with them and do the keynote speaker or one of the keynote speakers for that. And then the president of NADAC was even there watching Tom do this presentation. I'm just thinking, I'm so screwed. What am I getting myself into doing this? How am I ever going to compare to this guy? So I had to, I think just like anything else, you kind of, if you hang in there long enough, you grow into things. Change is always uncomfortable. And I had to kind of look in some, like David Bowie has a saying that for artists is that when your feet are touching solidly on the ground, like if you're in the water and your feet are touching solidly, it's not where the artistic juices come from. It's usually when your feet just can barely touch. They're just, if you can touch firmly, you're too comfortable. Make it so that way your feet just can barely touch. So that way you're uncomfortable and can't quite touch the bottom. And so I feel that, in this. So I know that I'm in a place where it helps me to grow, in what I'm doing. And so it's been a real, just a pretty intense growing journey. And I love it because I think all of it makes sense. And building that recovery capital within our communities of giving people opportunities to take the training. When we do our trainings up here, they're free. And some people, like when we talked about earlier, when I talk to people who are leaving treatment, and I'm like, so what do you like to do? What are some of your hobbies? And some folks know right off the bat, like, hey, I like to do this, I like to do that. And some people don't have any idea. They've been drinking or they've been using for so long that they're kind of out of touch sometimes with some of the things that used to make them happy or things that they used to do. And so part of the training sometimes can give people some new purpose. Like, wow, this is, maybe even getting a job in the field or doing something that they, being a part of this, or even maybe setting some goals for what they want to do. Like you said earlier, is such an important part. So it gives people some tools to be able to do that. And I love seeing those aha moments during the trainings, where you get to see people take on some new concepts. They're like, oh, I get it, and it's not always easy at the beginning. And we've seen, I'm sure you probably have too, like within your trainings where before the multiple pathways concept used to be completely like, whoa, or, even the you're in recovery when you say you are, some of those things, we used to get real, when I first started, even 3 years ago, we used to get a lot of pushback on some of those things. And now it's kind of becoming a little bit more, not that people don't get that aha moment, but it's just not as much pushback anymore. So I think you're starting to see that collective thing starting to happen where these newer ideas and recognizing that this isn't a one size fits all thing. We need to have all resources on deck with addiction.
Well, and what I can say in our area, at least, is that concept, I 100% agree. Over the last couple of years, we have seen more and more receptiveness to the concept of multiple pathways, but it tends to be like, even nowadays, that there's an asterisk next to it. It's like multiple pathways except medically assisted treatment, multiple pathways except, solo recovery. So I think that the concept is slowly, it's knocking down that bulwark and it's entering the zeitgeist of the recovery community, but it's like, we still got quite a bit of ways to go, but it's definitely there. But I 100% agree. I have seen a radical change of perspective, at least in the classes that I've collectively done over the last couple of years, where people are more and more receptive to that concept.
Yeah, and I think you're right. There's with the medically assisted treatment and the folks that we have during our trainings, and before we do the trainings, I usually ask folks too, like, are you open to multiple pathways, and especially folks who are on medication? And I'll kind of find out right there, where people are, and to see what kind of openness that they have to it. But then the other nice thing too is that we've seen other people who are in the training that are on medically assisted treatment. or have been on, they're such a great advocate for it, where they really get a chance to kind of, it's one thing coming from somebody that hasn't done it, but for coming from somebody that saved their life, you can't argue with that. You can't argue with somebody that says that this medication saved my life. Without it, I don't think I would be here. Yeah, it's hard to argue with those things, and especially when the science is on their side. So yeah, I do agree. There's still so much more that we need to do to help educate people on how important that resource is. Yeah.
So you've had a very extensive career. I'm wondering if you could pick out a moment, or maybe just a jumble of moments, and speak to your favorite thing that has happened in your career thus far, where it's like, and when I say favorite, I don't mean like, oh, that's interesting and it's ongoing. I'm wondering if there's a moment where it's like you got the tingles down the spine, the goose pimples, whatever it might be, of like, whoa, that was really cool, and it's so cool that I got to participate in that.
Wow. All right, so a couple of things come to mind. One of them is, and this is before I really started working, but it was when the first day that I felt good. I remember I was driving in Charlevoix. I was in early recovery, and I had this feeling that washed over me that everything was going to be okay, and I was sober, and I could feel my whole body it was just like the tingling sensation, just like what you were saying, all down my back. And I remember having this really strong feeling of gratitude that just went through me. And it was nothing specific, just that everything was going to be okay. It's one of those moments that I'll always remember. And I tell myself, when things get tough, or when things get difficult, it's going to be all right. I'm going to get through it, no matter how tough it is. And I've had to do some things that, have not been easy. Of course, even when you're sober, life throws things at you. You get people pass away. And especially in this field, it can be pretty humbling, sometimes and difficult to see friends and family members who don't make it. And so, but just doing the best that we can and taking care of ourselves is so important. I've been in this long enough to know how, burnout and some of those things can certainly play a huge role in some of this. So it's so important to take care of ourselves. But I would say that another thing that has been one of those aha moments, or those, we've done doing some, how I said earlier, watching Tom he did a presentation for MADAC and being like one of the keynote speakers. So when I got into this position, I put it down. I tried to do. It was a conference for. Oh my gosh! It was for a conference in Michigan. It might have been. Oh, I got to think what it was. For some reason, it's escaping me, because we did with the MADAC, and that was one. Then there's another conference in the state of Michigan, and there was hundreds and hundreds of people that were there. I think there's thousands actually, and so I applied to do a presentation for that. And me and one of my friends, Joyce, we went down there and did a presentation. I think there's probably maybe 100 folks within the room, and it was the first big presentation that we had done, and I was terrified, man. We're in this fancy hotel room in Saginaw. I had a fancy hotel room in Saginaw, and I'm sorry, in Grand Rapids, and it was just, I'm like, I remember that day that it hit me, we're like, oh my gosh, we're going to deliver this presentation. But we did it, and what was really awesome was that in the first couple rows who was there, I had put together 3 months of recovery back in 1994, and then I used one more time. And after that, and when I called the one person who really meant a lot to me. He was a counselor over at Munson. And so I called him and I said, man, I just messed up. I don't know what to do. And he said, it might be a good idea to get honest. If you don't get honest, it might eat you up and you might continue to use. And so I got honest. I told my probation officer at the time. I told my mom at the time. I told my support groups at the time. And that was the last time I used. That was December 4th, 1994. And it was exactly who I needed to talk to, exactly the words that I needed to hear. And he was sitting there at that presentation down in Grand Rapids for that conference, for the first big presentation that I've ever given. And it was just one of those moments where you're like, it all kind of came back. What are the odds of
the serendipity, everything coming to one moment?
You can't draw it up any better. Now, I would never think of how to make that. And he gave us lots of and we did have multiple pathways down there. it was just so cool. You know, it's one of those moments that you just don't forget, and it meant quite a bit. So, but I've had I working with the group that I get to work with and the networking of folks, I get to be inspired all the time. You know, it's one of the perks that comes with this job of being inspired and trying to share others, like you're doing with you know, with your podcast, is trying to share those stories that people have gone through. We've all gone through hell. You know, all of us have gone through some real difficulty in our lives, and being able to pull out and be able to become resilient and overcoming those difficulties just one day. You know, I like I said, I never in a million years thought that I would be where I am today. I just didn't think that that was going to happen. I thought I was doomed to live a pretty rough life. And so when I saw other people, you know, that were living, you know, and I could tell by their eyes, you know, when they looked at me, that they looked happy, you know, and they weren't using alcohol and drugs. And I wanted what they had. I wanted to learn more about how they got it, you know, and I still do. I still love, you know, meeting people, you know, like you and other people that are finding recovery to be the, you know, just such a blessing, and we want to share it with others. So it's pretty honored to have this opportunity, and having our son. You know, we had our son 8 years ago, and I got to do that sober. You know, and what a holy cow! And my wife, she had to have an emergency C-section. So when all of a sudden they said, "Oh, we're doing that," and we'd been up all night trying, and it's freaked me out, and then holding my son in my arms was just, holy cow. It doesn't get any better than that, man. And I got sober. We got married back in 2000. No alcohol at the wedding, on the beach, tons of recovery, friends in recovery. So I've been married for 26 years. We have a 25-year-old stepson, and he's turning 9 next week. So it's been pretty, you know, amazing journey.
That's awesome. That's so cool. So the next set of questions, I want to look at it kind of in different frameworks, because there's what I've found, especially doing interviews over time, is that these questions are different based upon kind of scope of service. So I want to talk specifically right now is, what do you hope never changes in your local recovery community? Kind of is the first question. And then the second part is, what do you hope never changes in the national or the international recovery community? So locally and then kind of nationally.
So locally, I would say we're really working on some things, you know, that, you know, we've got some people that are, you know, COVID has put a pretty big damper on some of the stuff that we really had been going strong with. And so Recovery Notes, I've been involved with, it's called Recovery Notes, New Opportunities to Enjoy Sobriety. We used to have open mic nights once a month here in Petoskey, and about 100 to 200 people would show up, and we would have people that would perform, and it was unbelievable, you know. And so because of COVID, we had to cut down, and so. But we've tried to do some other things. We're kind of involved with trying to develop a recovery friendly logo in our community. So just really those types of new ways of thinking, like what's missing, and then coming together as a group, and how do we tackle those issues. So I hope that never stops. You know, that we keep at it. We keep trying, even any small group of people. And it can be frustrating where you've got an idea, you see the need, and you've got this passion, and sometimes you don't always see that change happen right away, or maybe you do a Zoom call, or you're starting a new meeting and only one person shows, or maybe nobody shows, but you showed, you know. And so I think anybody that's willing to try something new, that they don't stop, that they find new ways, find other ways to bring people in, because there are other people out there that do want to get involved. We just got to find ways to reach them. So just that creativity, continuing to find ways to reach new people. You know, we're not always successful. What is it? Thomas Edison said it had to take me 10,000 ways to find out the one way that worked, or something. So it was all those things that just didn't work, that finally led to it working. So I love that creativity and people just finding new ways, you know. So I hope that never stops. I think that kind of goes locally and nationally. I love, you know, part of the peer, Faces and Voices did a compassion fatigue for peers yesterday, a training. They've done a couple of them, you know, and I just love seeing, you know, was it 260 people on the Zoom conference yesterday, and just these new ways for folks to get engaged, new ways for us to learn, to take care of ourselves. I mean, that is so important. I've seen so many people in this field to where, sometimes, yeah, you don't get paid a lot. You're operating with a lot, not a lot of resources. You can be overworked, and all those things can add up over time. And so if we don't take care of ourselves, and we're going to be in trouble. So yeah, taking care of ourselves, finding ways to, I think that's where Zoom can come into play a lot, is that we get to connect with each other a lot more easily. Now we can just jump on computer and, I can go talk with Christian for a little while and get inspired by what's going on down there. So I hope those kinds of things don't stop, even when COVID's done or whatever, that we continue ways to engage, learn. How much learning has happened since all this, Zoom trainings and Zoom meetings. There's been so much, and connectivity, connections with each other.
It's insane.
It is. It really is. Wow. It's unbelievable.
So let's go to kind of the flip coin of that. So, we're in the midst of a global pandemic. We are almost 15 to 16. We're not that far away from being in the 1-year anniversary of lockdowns, which is mind blowing to me. I don't think anybody would have thought in 2020 in March that we were going to be, fast forward 2021 March. We're still kind of doing this dance a little bit. So what is your biggest fear for the recovery movement in the midst of COVID?
Biggest fear that I have for the recovery community in the midst of COVID. So yeah, actually that kind of hits on a question I've been having lately too, is so before COVID, we were doing a lot of work on getting some multiple pathways started in our community. We had LifeRing, we had Smart Recovery, we had Recovery Dharma, we had Yoga Recovery. Those aren't going anymore, and so one of my fears about that is that, how hopefully, it takes a lot of work, for those types of meetings to start to establish themselves. And then all of a sudden COVID, it kind of goes away. And I think the same thing is true with even, 12-step recovery meetings. I'm not trying to just single out these other pathways, but I think other meetings, even I've heard animal clubs, many of them aren't making it because they don't have attendance and they can't, raise support. So those types of things, it is worrisome of, we have to try to get those back. But I also have that hope and know that, somehow, some way that we'll persevere, that somebody out there is going to like, hey, we need these meetings back in our communities again. And so are you going to ask me a question about possibly what is it that I want in the recovery community?
Yes. So that was actually the next part of the
flip
coin.
I better wait for it.
Yeah. So it's a perfect segue. So a part of that flip coin, once again, is what do you want? What are you absolutely determined to see happen in the recovery movement, in the recovery community in your lifetime?
Love it. I think it's such a great question. And it's a one that I think every community and recovery groups should get together and ask that question. What is it that we want to see? What's our vision? And I can speak on our community. We have to go quite a ways over to go to a local animal club. There's a couple of them, and they're small little animal clubs. They've been able to support themselves, but I would love to see recovery community centers in every single county in northern Michigan and in Michigan, that where people can have access to resources. You can have, looking at the Portland Animal Club, when they having that group over there, it's what an inspiring place. We had Brett on, I can't remember his last name, Condone. If you ever get a chance to get him on, I'm sure he would love to, Christian, but he only took that position because he said, I'll take this position if you guys let me bring in multiple pathways. And that took it to a whole new level of, just getting people opportunities to learn, like cooking classes and, art and yoga and all those things. If we invest in health and wealth, if we invest in health, we're going to have a really vibrant recovery, community. Like in our community, we invest, we have so much alcohol, wine tours and all that. We have all that you can ever ask for those types of, why don't we have more opportunities for folks within the recovery community to go to see, to have visible recovery community center like CCAR has and other recovery community centers have. So we're working on that. We're trying to find ways. Part of a group that I'm involved with is, trying to develop a recovery friendly logo that we can take to area businesses and try to get their buy-in. So that way, hopefully we can start to raise some funds so that way we can have a recovery community center in our area. So that's what we want to see. But I think I was on a web conference with Tom Hill, who was talking about recovery community centers. And he really said, like with friendship centers and UAWs and all those types of things, that they kind of came down with federal funds. So I think with this kind of change and opportunities, that we're going to have those kinds of funds to be able to help support those types of facilities. And we all win. When we had a place in our town that took on this, it's like a outdoor restaurant, like food truck, but we've got the big kegs, out there, with, drinking and stuff. Well, people are complaining about how loud it is after, when at 10 o'clock at night, 11 o'clock at night, it's like, well, yeah, that's what happens when you bring a whole bunch of people and alcohol together, but I tell you what, when you have a recovery community center, when we have our recovery notes events, we have, almost 200 people at one event, and they're all coming in, and we've never had one police call, never had one altercation. We never had any problem. It was inspiring. People left saying that was amazing. And so those are the types of people that we want. And for some reason in our society, in our communities, we kind of like have a stigma on that of like, we don't want those folks around. How is that possible? Well, how is that we wouldn't want those people around? Those are the people that we want. We want to help them and their families. We have kids coming with their families to watch mom or dad perform on the stage and have a good time. And so somehow that just got twisted within the stigma of addiction, and we need to change it, and I think those types of events and these types of things are hoping to do that.
I think that is such a brilliant answer. I couldn't agree more. It revolves around stigma, but at the end of the day, I haven't seen many, if any, complaints against any major recovery events, and I've been to my fair share of them. And then to hear, the stigmatization that happens about those things versus like, let's go to a huge concert and get wildly drunk or high or whatever it might be, and then there's no stigma behind that. It's somewhat mind-blowing to me. I will tell you that. So there's a couple of questions left. We don't have a whole heck of a lot of time, but I do want to get to these. So this is an interesting one. The reason we asked this question is when we're teaching our recoveries, or when we're, marking out a plan A, or we're marking out a recovery plan, one of the things that we always focus on first, because it's in the recovery's hands, is how do they start their day? What are they doing right off the clip? What is, whether it be meditation or eating right or waking up at the same time, something like that. So in your opinion, what is the best way to start your day?
So the best way to start my day is to be able to be aware of my foot touching the floor. I do my best to be aware of, and it really helps to remind myself that I'm alive. I love there's the Eastern philosophy and Buddhist philosophy that I think it was Thich Nhat Hanh who has this poem, but you can, when you realize that you're touching the floor and to know that you're alive, there's no better thing, to know that you're alive and to be alive. It kind of reminds me of like, I'm alive, because I won't be, at some point. And so to really realize that and to be appreciative of it and to start off my day like that, it's a great way to just be present, and to feel my foot touch the floor, and that the floor always supports me every single morning that I get out of my bed, and it's there, is a great way to start the day. And trying to use some positive mental attitude, of course, like, all right, let's have some fun today. I always tell my son when we go into school, are you gonna have fun today? Yeah, like, let's not make school being boring. Let's have some fun, have some fun, make it fun. Because if I can't make it fun, I'm going to lose interest, so I'm going to gotta have that kid attitude. And so, yeah, that's a great question. And I bet you have some really good feedback from a lot of folks on how they start their day. It's a good one.
It tends to be, it's all different answers, but it all revolves around the same kind of concept, which is treasuring and giving thanks to the universe, to God, to whatever it is, higher power, whatever it might be, but giving thanks for this day and being able to participate in the day. So it's awesome to hear that. So before we get going here, what are some things that you had to unlearn since you started your recovery journey?
Things that I had to unlearn. You know what? I didn't know much about medication-assisted treatment. I didn't know much about, and so actually the agency that I work for is, they provide methadone, and they're one of only two in all of Northern Michigan that provides methadone. And if you can believe that in an opioid epidemic, there's only 2 places and they're both in the same county, which is just unbelievable. I used to not understand that. I didn't know. And I remember that thought of, it was, if you're going to use something, it's got to be for short term, and you're not really sober. And so I had those same biases, those same judgments. And so I had to unlearn that. How I unlearned it was listening to people who were on it, who were utilizing it, and realizing how important it was for them in their recovery. And then hearing the science, hearing how, your dopamine, how it changes your brain chemistry when you've been on, opiates for such a long period of time. And so it's not so much of it's not a person problem. It's a chemical imbalance that happens within our brains. And I've talked with, and it's hard because, when you talk to people who have been able to just stop, they didn't need it, right? Because I've talked to there's one particular person I talked to, he's like an army, I can't remember what he did in the army, but just a real tough person. He's like, I just quit, I just stopped. So when you have some people, it really goes back into that, you're in recovery if you say you are, or everybody's different, everybody's chemical makeup is different. And so and past experiences are different. So there's so much, it's a complex issue. And so so I had to unlearn to be, judgmental with folks who utilize medication. And so, there's a lot of different things that I've had to unlearn too, even the multiple pathways approach, understanding that there's so many people out there who found recovery differently than I have, and that's okay. Whatever works for somebody. I'm so slow to judge anybody who is a dry drunk anymore. I think that used to be one of the terms we used to call people who just didn't go to meetings. They just, and that's such a judgmental way of approaching people. I feel like, in my opinion, where if somebody is stopping using, and they're, finding a better life for themselves, my hat's off to them. So I've just got to be very careful on how I perceive others and how they're with their recovery or with their life, and I'm continually learning and continuing to unlearn and continuing to learn. I've got so much to learn yet.
I think that's the story of recovery, man, is unlearning the things that you thought you knew and learning the things that you didn't know. And it's a constant, revolving door. So my last question to you, Tory, is what is coming up? Is there anything big that you want to talk about? Maybe events, Zoom things, or conferences, anything like that? What's coming up?
Sure. Well, like, you guys are doing here, we've been doing our virtual inspired recovery, which is almost a year. We've almost been doing it. It'll be March like 14th, I think, or 15th. It's been a year. So it's crazy. And so we've had, I think we've had 100 guests on, from all over the country. And so Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, we do our virtual inspired recovery series. Wednesday is where we talk, what you guys kind of do. We talk with somebody, and folks are welcome to join in. We just had an amazing person on Wednesday, Nancy Dow. She lost her daughter to addiction, and I will tell you what, she is so inspiring. I see myself, I could have been, that person, and my mom could have been the other side doing what she's doing to try to help find, helping so that way other people can find recovery sooner and connect them to resources. So everybody has such a powerful story, no matter who you are. So we've been doing that. Tuesday and Thursday, we do a recovery hour where anybody's welcome to join. We just have an opportunity to talk recovery and get a chance to meet other people and support each other. So anybody's welcome. And we have a NIMSAS Peer Recovery Support Services Facebook page. It's a mouthful. We also have we have a web page called upickrecovery.org. where we put up our trainings. We're going to be doing a recovery messaging training. One thing about online trainings, man, it's been pretty full, and we're getting packed. And so it's been a great way for us to stay connected with people and for folks to take some trainings, during all this online stuff. So
I think what I've learned most about the trainings in general is I wasn't aware, because of how easy they are. It's not easy to run by any means, but the build up and having to make sure that everybody's in and everybody's checked all the boxes and all that kind of stuff. But the fluidity and I know personally, I fool myself into well, we can do this training and then do a training in the next week and a training the next week. And I'm sitting here thinking it's easy to put these trainings on. It's much more difficult in all the lead up, because it's like 6 weeks to get ready for one training. And then you're like, okay, I'm getting ready for this training here, and then I have to overlap another one because of trainings happening a month later. So, but I just got to say, Tory, you know, you're an inspiration, man. I truly do thank you for doing this. I'm definitely going to have you on again so that maybe you can teach a segment, especially about like recovery messaging or something like that. For those of you who are tuning in, this concludes our podcast. As you know, Mondays we do the science of addiction. Wednesdays we are doing our meditations. Fridays we interview. I believe this next Monday we start motivational interviewing, a 2-part series on motivational interviewing, and then casting into the April, we are going to be doing ACEs, so adverse childhood experiences training with Dr. Bob Powell. That being said, thank you and have a good one.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Christian. Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you, Tory.
Awesome.
You have a good one, man.
Thanks, you too.
Bye.
Bye.